I think of good judgment a lot in hiring because I noticed that when people go to jobs and they've had a substantial amount of industry experience, that's not necessarily indicative that they're going to be successful in the firm. And what I've come to realize in recruiting is that that's often because companies define good judgment differently because they have different core values, they have different mission statements, different goals, different processes. And so their definition of good judgment differs maybe to some degree with a candidate, in that the quality of a good leader is somebody who can define and onboard and train and hold people accountable for their company's definition of good judgment. And so it's been a little bit of a quest for me to think through, like, what is the ingredient? What are the ingredients to this good judgment? And for a person, I think it is four things. And I'm maybe oversimplifying here. There's probably many other things that you can add, but to simplify it in just my observations, I see character, emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, and experience as being the fundamental larger ingredients to what we would call good judgment. And so to stress test this a little bit, an example would be of maybe compromised judgment is, let's say you've got somebody with very poor character but a lot of experience, outputs judgment decisions that are manipulative, right? And this would be bad judgment relative to somebody with a stronger moral framework. Or you could have somebody with strong character, poor emotional intelligence, good intellectual intelligence, and good experience, and they constantly make, in some sense, good defensible decisions, but they're rough on the people around them. We see this a lot in construction. Or you could have strong character, strong emotional intelligence, strong intellectual intelligence, but very low experience or low pattern recognition. And that person will make compromised decisions because they haven't seen the cause and effect relationship between certain decisions and outcomes in construction. And so as you're going through an interview process, you can think about evaluating these four qualities in a candidate and looking for signs that they have good character. You do this passively. You give them opportunities to demonstrate good character. If you get an opportunity to talk about mistakes, or let's say they show up late, asking them why, without putting them in a really shamed position, but give them an opportunity to show humility, to show integrity, to show honesty. Um, Intellectual capacity in the ability to look at situations and see shades of gray, to think in nuance, the emotional intelligence to recognize the human dynamics to construction. In some sense, construction is the easy part, the humans are the hard part. And so how much do they understand that their ability to relate with, understand humans, and work effectively with them will be a major factor to their success in the work. And then finally, their experience level, and what that experience level says about their ability to recognize patterns, good and bad, to then forecast and anticipate problems out in the future, to understand the cause and effect relationships between their behavior and outcomes, what needs to happen on a project for a superintendent or a project manager, estimator, et cetera. Any sort of a leadership role where they're making decisions in some sense for a living. One other important thing to think about good judgment is for a company to think about understanding and being self-aware about what their definition of good judgment means, and what kind of person, what kind of character, what kind of emotional intelligence, what kind of intellectual intelligence, and what kind of experience tends to produce the right kind of judgment that succeeds within their organization. And I'll come to tell you that every company is, in some sense, an expression of its leadership, of its founders, to a remarkable degree. And what I mean by that is, you can think of it like a business is like a painting, in that it reflects the personality, strengths, and weaknesses of the leaders in the firm, often to a degree that they don't necessarily even inherently recognize, in a fascinating degree. But I've seen inside hundreds of firms, and I can tell you that when you see behaviors in the people in the firm, a lot of times you can trace those back to the leaders directly, through in many different senses, either active or passive leadership, creating problems, solving problems, etc. And so I encourage leaders to think about what good judgment means for you, what the signs are for good judgment, defining that for your team, holding people accountable, creating clarity of, hey, in this situation, in an RFI, this is what good judgment looks like, right? This is the output of good judgment, for example. And the more you can get clarity organizationally on what good judgment means, the more you can communicate clearly to a candidate about what good judgment means for you. You can set those terms in the interview process and then continue to onboard them, train them, and hold them accountable for expressing that kind of good judgment. And remember, I'm using the term good judgment pretty broadly here, right? This is good judgment about how they show up to working with coworkers, with all the relationships throughout the whole life cycle of a project, good judgment in construction itself, how something should be constructed, etc. Everything is at some level of resolution a judgment decision, from the way you drive to the way you talk to people, the way you process decisions, work through challenging situations. There's a lot of problems in construction that require good judgment. So just some thoughts from a recruiter who thinks a lot about judgment when it comes to helping very diverse people decide whether or not they should work together.